Good morning, lovely people. Welcome to Place and Resources, the best committee. Wednesday, 28th of July. My name's Carol Jones, I'm chairing. I am Vice Chairman Liz. He has abandoned us for a family wedding, but we can live with that. It's okay. Just remember the microphone issue, everybody knows about that. And when you first speak, please just introduce yourself. So moving swiftly on, apologies.
Chairman, apologies from Councillors Fry and Hope.
Thank you very much. Do you know, I've forgotten something already. We've only just started, and I have forgotten to mention that the officers attending are John Selgren, our Executive Director of Place, and lovely Lindsay, as she is known in the trade, our Senior Democratic Services Officer. Right, item number 2, the minutes for the last meeting. Is everybody in agreement that they're signed as a correct record? Thank you, will do. Item number 3, declarations of interest. Councillor Alford.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I am Councillor Alford of Egerton Ward, and I have a little bit of a history story to tell you, because 10 years ago, I was a governor of Weymouth College and also a director of the Redlands Operating Company. Now, that was 10 years ago. It doesn't apply now, of course, but because of that background, I'm going to adopt the stance of not participating in the debate or even voting on it.
Thank you very much. Okay, Chairman's update. To be honest, I don't really have anything other than just to remind you that we have members speaking before non-members on each item. Item number 6, questions from members. Done it again, public participation. We have none, Item number 6, question from members. I don't believe we have any, Lindsay. Okay, we move straight to item number 7. This is going to be presented by Jackie Halewood, and this is on the amateur archaeological fieldwork and metal detecting policy for Dorset Council land. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jackie Halewood. I'm the Principal Archivist at the Dorset History Centre, and I'm manager of my colleague Claire Pinder, who's with me today, the Senior Archaeologist responsible for the Historic Environment Record. The purpose of this report is to bring forward for adoption by Dorset Council a revised policy on amateur archaeological fieldwork and metal detecting on council land. The previous policy was adopted in 1996 and related only to metal detecting on Dorset County farms and is now also out of date in other respects. The reason for the new policy is that since LGR, Dorset Council owns a greater diversity of land, such as country parks and playgrounds, this new policy would encompass all council-owned land. In the intervening years, there has been an increase in requests for access to land for a greater range of amateur archaeological activities, such as field walking, and an increase in interest in metal detecting as archaeology and local history research becomes a more popular outdoor recreational activity. Dorset has a rich historic environment which is greatly enjoyed and explored by both locals and visitors to the county. Archaeological and heritage sites are protected by a range of laws, such as the Treasure Act 1996 and Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Areas Act 1979. However, as responsible landlords, we need to ensure that archaeological or metal-detecting activity is carried out to appropriate standards and within the provisions of these laws to protect important archaeological and natural environment sites in Dorset. The new policy extends the current approval system for access for metal detecting on council farms to include other amateur archaeological fieldwork and all Dorset Council land. As before, in the previous policy, fieldwork of this sort is not permitted on Dorset Council land unless approved by the senior archaeologist responsible for the historic environment record, in consultation with the relevant tenant or council officer managing the land. Application for written approval can be made by individuals, small groups, or responsible bodies such as university, clubs, or societies. Those requesting permission will continue to have to meet a number of criteria. These include demonstrating awareness of the relevant legislation and good track record of archaeological activity to the appropriate standard, demonstrating awareness of appropriate health and safety measures for the activity, and adhering to any special conditions relating to the site. All finds remain the property of Dorset Council. If granted, permission will be for a specified site and area and for a specified time. No blanket permission will be granted. Archaeological investigations will be prohibited on some sites, such as sites of special scientific interest. This policy does not relate to research or fieldwork by archaeological building specialists or archaeological contractors undertaken as part of the planning process or commissioned by Dorset Council as a landowner. The aims of the policy are to clarify the policy and procedure for dealing with these requests for Dorset Council officers and tenants, to continue to build on the mutual trust and dialogue with the amateur archaeological community, to benefit the archaeological record with our management of council land and buildings being based on better information and understanding, helping us to achieve best practice all round. The change will bring about an awareness with colleagues about this policy and enable us to gather statistics about this type of activity better than before. And I recommend this for adoption.
Thank you very much. That all seems pretty straightforward. Councillor Jesperson, would you like to come in here?
I would, thank you. First of all, Councillor Sherry Jesperson, Hill Forts and Upper Tarrants Ward. Can I say, first of all, I think it's an excellent and very timely policy, really, really good. So thank you very much indeed. I have 2 points I'd like to make about it, one of which is just a small suggestion, which I'll come to. The second is a drafting point, but quite a big one. I have trouble with the use of the word amateur. I don't think that we need to be using the word amateur. First of all, I think it's ambiguous. I used to be a member of Dorset Dowsers. We were affiliated to the British Society of Dowsers. We had people with PhDs, people who did dowsing for a living, people who had written and lectured extensively on the subject of dowsing. None of those people thought of themselves as amateurs, but in the context of this report, they are. So I think the word amateur is ambiguous. In fact, when I read the policy carefully, I think throughout the word amateur is redundant. What you're actually talking about, I think, is unauthorised. And it doesn't really matter whether they're amateurs or professionals, it's whether or not they're authorised to be there or not. So I think maybe amateur came forward from the previous policy, but I think that word is redundant. If we look at policy 2, amateur archaeological fieldwork and metal detecting is not permitted on land, what you're really saying is archaeological field work and metal detecting is not permitted, whether it's amateur or not. So I don't think you need the word amateur. And then again in 3.2 you say this policy applies to all amateur archaeological activity. I think it applies to all archaeological activity, amateur or not. So I think that might be just a carryover, and I think the word is redundant and ambiguous. So if we could possibly just drop it, make it one word shorter.
Yes, we can look at that, and we can probably take that away or look into your suggestion. Thank you for that.
Second point, yes. And again, this you may or may not find this helpful. Given that it's the nature of this sort of activity, that it involves quite a lot of young people on sites in a fairly loosely supervised context, I wondered if there was any need to be putting in something here about us requiring child safeguarding policies from the people we're giving permission. Obviously, we don't want to go through all of their policies if they've got equality policy and health, and that's understood. I just wondered if safeguarding should be given a particular message, mention here. Just a thought.
Thank you, Councillor Jesperson. Jackie, what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you. We can include that in our list of requirements appropriate to the activity. Certainly, we can specify it.
Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to speak? I've got Councillor Alford, then Councillor Coombs.
Thank you. I'm going to make a comment about what might be described as the terms of trade. And I'm thinking of all fines are the property of the council, etc., etc. And it does seem to me that one objective of this policy statement is to act as something of a disincentive to the world of the personal detectorist. I use that expression for the moment. So I'd be interested in your comment about that. And I have then wondered, when you talk about work commissioned by the council, and I can understand that, but I wonder whether very much of it would happen simply because if the council is commissioning archaeological work, there's likely to be a cost to the council from so doing, and the budget may not be sufficient.
Thank you, Councillor Alford. Jackie, would you like to come in?
I take the first point first, and I might need to pass on to my colleague, Claire. Under law, as I understand it, all fines are the property of the landowner, irrespective of their value. So, as Dorset Council would be the landowner, then that would be the property of Dorset Council, and that is across the board, across the country, and in law. The exception to that is that fines that are considered to be of potential treasure under the Treasure Act have to be are considered Crown property and immediately have to be referred to the coroner, who makes a decision on whether they are treasure, and there is very specific ways in which those have to be dealt with. So if there is a museum or someone who can take that treasure on, then that happens, and there is compensation for the landowner, and in some cases that's shared with the finder. Is that right? I'll pass that on to Claire, just a sec.
Yes, generally under the Treasure Act, the finder is also entitled to compensation. In this case, one of our conditions is, and would be under the proposed new policy, that anybody given permission would waive their entitlement. That's to make it easier to get important fines into local museums or even national museums if they're very important, because the museum, any museum acquiring objects through the Treasure Act process has to find the money to pay for them. We also wanted to bring metal detecting and the full range of fieldwork activities such as field walking, geophysical survey, which is often carried out by local groups of people, under the same umbrella in terms of how things pan out as far as the Treasure Act is concerned, if they should find something that is a find of potential treasure. And under the Treasure Act, organised archaeological activities are excluded from entitlement to a compensation if a find is deemed to be treasure. So we just wanted to level the playing field for that full range of activities there.
On the question of the incentive, they will be accredited for finding the treasure, and so therefore, it's part of a fine that they will have had as well. Sorry, I can't now remember what the second question was. Sorry about that.
Yes, I'll come back with the other point again. On the answer, I regret I wasn't able to hear what you were saying, so I will listen to it in the recording, and I'm sure it's quite detailed and interesting. I think what I was trying to do was to compare our approach with what you might find in what might be described as the private sector, where there would normally be a finder and the landowner sharing the rewards, as it were. And I think our approach is somewhat different and perhaps less of an incentive to the would-be finder. Anyway, I'll leave that as a point. The other question I had was about arrangements for commissioning work and the suggestion I was making that to commission work is likely to involve some sort of budgetary activity.
I'll pass you back to Claire for that one. Thank you.
Commercial archaeological work, as commissioned by Dorset Council, is mentioned because we wanted to make it clear that that was excluded from the policy. And of course, there is a cost involved to the council should it commission archaeological work for planning purposes or to inform the better management of a particular site. But that is not one of the activities covered by what we are suggesting here.
I think that sometimes those commissioned works have to take place for planning and so on. So that is part of what is already happening within the council. So it's part of of the work that goes on in the planning process in any case. It's just that wanted to make sure that that was the permission side of it. And there is already investigation by the historic environment record for any of that type of work that takes place. So that is already part of what the planning process and happens in any case. So I don't think that's an additional cost or indeed a change really. It's just that we wanted to indicate that it is not covered by this policy.
Much. Councillor Coombs.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman. Councillor Tony Coombs, Verwood Ward. I noticed that this draft policy talks about all Dorset Council land. The one thing I didn't see mentioned anywhere was highway verge, because obviously there are ancient road marker stones and so on, which I know in the past have always been a point of interest to see if there have been things dropped in and around. And I just wondered what how the policy fitted around that, and because I couldn't see any mention of it in the report.
Thank you. Jackie, can you come in on that?
Thank you for that. Yes, the verges are still part of council land. So that is implicit, I suppose, in the policy at the moment, that land is covered, the verges are covered by the policy.
Lovely, thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak? Oh, sorry. Yes, of course you can.
Thank you. Bearing in mind that this policy is being aimed at, should I say, the non-professional, I think that it would be worth adding that Dorset Council land includes highway verges so that it is absolutely clear.
Okay, are you happy with that, Jackie? We can put that in along with the amendments that Councillor Jesperson.
Yes, I think so in broad terms.
Yes, that's a very important point, and it has been raised in discussions with our countryside and highways colleagues as a source of concern where people are attempting to carry out field work in dangerous situations, apart from anything else, and causing a distraction to road users. So that is definitely on our list of items to deal with in the more detailed guidance that we're going to be providing.
Thank you. I was just wondering if there is an amount of officer time taken up to putting these agreements together for people, is it something we're going to be able to charge for at all?
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Lisa Cotton, Head of Customer Libraries and Archives. I'll pick that one up. In summary, we feel that a charging regime would, in general terms, improve Dorset Council's management of its estate. But we don't think that charging will bring any benefits, as it has the potential to increase the administrative burden. Not reduce it. There is also a concern that charge, however might small, might lead to people viewing this is not us providing guidance and a clear process for the benefit of all. So we have had a look at that. We can keep that on review, and we've also talked about that with 151 officer and other colleagues within finance. But we feel the administrative burden would actually outweigh the potential and the value and benefit of the guidance and the policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, if nobody else wishes to speak, we've got a recommendation, and we've made some. We've had a discussion about things to be just tweaked and added slightly. Is everybody happy that we move that and we move on? Yes? Thank you very much. Okay, we are now moving on to item 8, which is the Redlands Community Sports Hub lease and management arrangements. I just wanted to remind members that we have got some exempt appendices, and so we really cannot get into discussions about anything within those appendices without going into an exempt status for our meeting. So I'm hoping everybody has read those. But if we need to go into exempt, we will go into exempt. We'll have that moved, but we will then come back and in public session go through the recommendations so that they are seen and in public. Thank you. So this is going to be, the report is going to be given to us by Peter Hopkins, who I have to say, Peter, you've done a most huge amount of work on this. Congratulations. Take us through it.
Thank you, Chair. Executive Director of Place, John Sogan, wants to make a few words first, though, I believe.
John?
Chairman, if that's okay with you, I would perhaps value doing that, and I hope that it'd be helpful to members as context. So John Sogan, Executive Director for Place, but in fairness, I've been introduced. The report itself concerns the lease of the Redlands site, a site which is owned by Dorset Council, but obviously has been, at present, he's on a long lease to Weymouth College. So, Chairman, I thought it might be helpful I just gave some context to this report that you've got before you this morning, and we hope will go on to Cabinet in September, because as many members know, and we've certainly read in the media, that there's been a lot of public interest in this matter, and I thought it therefore might be helpful perhaps just to set out that context so that members have got that in as context to the specific issue which is around the lease. So about 2.5 years ago, and it was certainly before COVID, not long after we started as Dorset Council, the Chief Executive received a letter from the principal, then principal, of Weymouth College, stating that the college was finding it difficult to maintain the property, to maintain the operation of the facility, and therefore were looking to see if the council would consider releasing them from the requirements of the lease. And the prompt to that was, and again I think known to many in the room, Weymouth College have had, but I think fair to say they are now through, a very difficult financial period. But one of the things that remains a challenge for them is the operation of the Redlands facility. So it's in that context that they wrote to Matt Prosser about 2.5 years ago. Matt, in his infinite wisdom, asked me if I would take on leading that project. So what I'm just about to tell you is the account of what has happened over that period. So what I did was to establish a working group of senior officers from Dorset Council, and I'm particularly grateful not only to Pete, who's joined us more recently, but particularly to Paul Rutter, our Leisure Services Manager, who's put a massive amount of work into this and has been key to producing the report. And also in Peter's team to John Morgan, one of our property officers, who again has put many, many hours into dealing with this. And we've also been supported by colleagues like Ken Buckham along the way. So we put that together with colleagues from Weymouth College. And again, if I may just put on public record, Rob Cole, who is now the Deputy Chief Executive of Weymouth College, but has responsibility for the Redlands operation, has also put a lot of time and effort in. I would just remark, has worked very, very closely in a very supportive manner with us to see if we can get the best possible outcome in terms of Redlands for the community which it serves. And also, of course, more recently to Martin Kimberley, the Director of Active Dorset, again, a part of the story I will come to in a moment. So that group has been working. We've been meeting fortnightly, Chairman, throughout that period and throughout COVID, and thank goodness for online technology, because it means the project hasn't needed to be halted during the pandemic. So as I say, the decision before you concerns the request by Weymouth College to release the college from its commitment under the lease, and now to consider that, assigning that to a third party. Just by way of context, I think most members in the Chamber will be aware, leisure is not technically a statutory function of the Council. We do not have to provide leisure or a leisure service. But for very good reasons, the Council decides to take a part in leisure, and as you know, all of the leisure operations that we have are contracted to third parties to manage on our behalf. That means, of course, that the Council's ability to run leisure services directly is not as great as it would be in councils that do run leisure themselves in-house. And that has also coloured the discussions we've had with Weymouth College about how we move forward into the future. So the first thing that project team did was to look at the provision that was made. So although the issue that is at stake concerned the lease, clearly the council has that wider set of policy objectives to support leisure and to support active recreation in order to promote wellbeing within the community. So it was with that in mind that the first task that we asked Paul to do was to work with the college to carry out a full audit of all of the things that were currently run at Redlands. And also, and I stress, and this is very important to understand the context of this, to consider in a very worst case scenario that if for whatever reason it was not possible to continue activities at the Redlands site, how could that provision be met elsewhere within the community? What that study revealed, and I think that was very helpful in terms of what has then come to pass subsequently, is that whilst most of the provision could be met within the immediate area, not all of it could. And further, it is also fair to reflect that some of that alternative reprovision would have been at some distance from the Redlands site, so therefore potentially causing those who currently use it, if it had to be reprovisioned to other sites, that they would have had further to travel, and that might have been quite limiting in terms of some of the client groups that use the Redlands site currently. So that was very much the backdrop in terms of the service context. So at that point, the college was still very clear that the financial implications of them continuing to run Redlands were going to cause them quite a considerable financial difficulty going forward. So at that point, we said to them, well, and almost taking the council's own leisure operation model, what about you approaching leisure operators and make a call out into the wider community to see if someone else would like to take over the operation of that facility, mindful of what we'd learnt during the evidence gathering stage, that actually this facility provides a lot of important facilities for people within the Weymouth and immediate locality community. So they did just that. They put out an expression of interest. We put them in direct touch with all of the council's leisure operators and indeed with a number of others that although we are not currently contracted to, we do keep a relationship with the wider leisure sector. That call was also made very publicly, so the college engaged in quite a detailed media campaign to make sure there was a clear understanding within that community that this is what they were seeking to do, and to make sure that as many people who would have wished to could have come forward at that point and offered to take on the running of the Redlands facility. The result of that was that the college only received one expression of interest, and that came from Active Dorset. And what happened at that stage was that the contents of the Active Dorset proposal were shared within the local community, and based on the feedback that came forward, there was then further discussion about the facilities which Active Dorset would run. The specific context is what Active Dorset had proposed in the first set of proposals was to operate Redlands on the same basis of a very similar facility that they currently run very successfully in Bournemouth, and they were proposing to operate that same model at the Redlands site. What transpired following the engagement was done with the local community is that there was a feeling that that wasn't quite the right match of provision to meet the current requirements of Weymouth and in particular of the current usage of Redlands. And the particular crux of that was about the initial Active Dorset proposal didn't contain a great deal of offer in terms of the indoor facilities. It was largely focused on an acceleration of the outdoor recreational facilities at the Redlands site, less focused on the indoor. And again, I think fair to say the analysis that we had done previously and the feedback that we got from local community very clearly demonstrated that there was that slight mismatch in the first proposal from Active Dorset. So again, the project team were in active discussion throughout this time, and based on that feedback, we asked both ourselves and the college if Active Dorset would reconsider that proposal and to see if they would be willing to come forward with something which better fitted the requirements of that local community and to ensure that we retained as much of the existing activity as was possible. And that, Chairman, is exactly what Active Dorset had done. They did revise their proposal. We have shared that proposal, as you know, and the portfolio holder was part of that discussion where we fed back to the community in Weymouth that the Active Dorset proposal is now on the table, is being considered, and this lease would facilitate, would ensure that the range of operations that or facilities that are currently provided at Redlands would continue. I think I'm bound to point out at this point, Chairman, because I think this may come up in the part that Peter will present about the asset side, is there is a difference in the model. So one of the things that the analysis that we did at that early stage demonstrated was it is indeed the case that currently Weymouth College is subsidised in that activity. And the reason for that is they're using a particular model of leisure delivery, which is certainly known to us as accounts. It's a perfectly reasonable and sensible way to run a leisure service. But nonetheless, it does require a subsidy because of the number of staff that are involved in delivering it. The shift, and for absolute clarity, that Active Dorset are proposing, so how can you get from something that Weymouth College is currently running and you can now run the same thing without that same level of subsidy? The way that Active Dorset are going to achieve that is through the operation of an active key holder model. So this is putting a little bit more requirement on the users of the centre to set things up, so to set up badminton nets and those sorts of things. And to, in a sense, take a more active part in it. There's been a generous offer on the table from Weymouth Town Council to provide some support around the maintenance of the site, which has also very much helped in terms of enabling Active Dorset to come forward and confirm their proposal. And I say puts a little bit more onus onto the end users of the facility to do a little bit more of the work, which means that there isn't the overhead currently required by Weymouth College. I'll perhaps pause or indeed end at that point, Chairman. I don't know whether you want to take any points about the kind of context at this stage, or whether I hand straight over to Peter and he talks about the lease side of things.
I think you've covered everything very well and everything's in the report. Peter, did you want to come in with your part?
Thank you, John, Chair. Yes, John's comprehensively covered a lot of that background covered in the report, so thank you for that. From the lease point of view, the recommendations are clear. Because we're asking for an early surrender, it is a cabinet decision. That doesn't sit within delegated officers' authority to do so. The team, as John said, have been working very hard over the last 6 months now, once we've got to that solution with Active Dorset, to put into place the funding mechanisms to make sure the council is protected and building up the business case with Active Dorset. So in some respects, I would just recommend the 4 options forward going forward without going back through the detail. I'm happy to take any questions around that proposal.
Thank you. Let's open this up. If you've got any questions or would like to speak, please do. But if you want to indicate whether you might like to go into any of the appendices at a later stage in our meeting, can you please do so at the time? Would anybody like to ask Councillor Rowe?
Yeah, I just wanted to find out a little bit more about the key holder model and the community users and volunteers. I think John said putting up the nets and perhaps taking more of an active role. But is there anything that they would need training for? Is there anything around health and safety, risk assessments? Thank you.
If I may, Chairman, yes, thank you for that, and thank you for that question. So yes, it does. So certainly the model that Active Dorset are using is that active key holder model where the clubs themselves will take a greater part in terms of opening the building, putting up the nets, and for other sports, the appropriate equipment. So in terms of Active Dorset's experience and capacity, we've done a lot of work, and Paul Rutter in particular has worked with them very closely, not just in the last 6 months, but in the run-up to it. So they are going to provide all of that support to ensure that those clubs can take this over confidently, and indeed specifically, because this has been part of the discussions around those things like health and safety and making sure they've got adequate first aiders and so on. One of the reasons we are confident about how that is being approached by Active Dorset is that Active Dorset, because of the nature of the organisation that they are engaged with almost all of the national governing bodies. So they've had a very clear conversation with the national governing bodies about the maintenance of standards and those sorts of things that Councillor Rowe has raised, and are ensuring that there is a programme put in place with the local operators, so the local clubs, to ensure that they're compliant with that as we move into the new form of operation.
Thank you. Are you happy with that, Councillor Rowe? Is there somebody else here who might like to come in? Councillor Coombs.
Thank you, Chairman. Tony Coombs, Verwood Ward. I understand the drive to having the community take much more of a control presence. But I just wanted to ask a question about fail-safe security, because human nature being what it is, there's always someone that will forget to lock up at the end of the night. So what is the fail-safe security that ensures that the building is protected should somebody forget? Because it leaves a whole lot of stuff open to a whole range of things.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you, good question. That's been a conversation we have picked up with Active Dorset. So again, whilst we are moving away from a staffing base all the time, the key holder model will actually operate from the front door to get in. So there will be the sensors on the door to know if they're locked or not, and they will have their own security to make sure the building is secure at the night, which will be no different than any other. So from our landlord point of view, we're ensuring in the new lease actually that building is protected, and Active Dorset have factored those costs into their operational costs going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Jesperson.
Yes, Sherry Jesperson, Hill Fortswood. Just to give some reassurance on the key holder model, of course, this is what village halls all across Dorset have been doing for decades, and it works very well. As a former chairman of a village hall trust, a certain amount of training is given at the beginning. Written instructions are clearly displayed. And arrangements are made for emergencies. You have an emergency key holder. But I mean, it's a very effective model and it works very well, and I don't foresee any difficulties at all. In fact, I think it's a very constructive way forward.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak? In which case, I know that Councillor Heatley, who is a user of Redlands, would like to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Brian Heatley from Rodwell and Wyke in Weymouth. I want to make a rather personal contribution because I'm a former regular user of Redlands, and I feel quite strongly about this, and I want to support this paper. Almost 20 years ago, I had a heart attack followed by a double bypass operation. The NHS sent me off onto an exercise class after that, and in the later years, that class was at Redlands with quite a lot of other older people. That class changed my life. I mean, it was of huge significance to me. The main thing it did, apart from making me a bit fitter, was begin to give me more confidence about what I could do. I now do the park run in Weymouth on Saturdays, and perhaps more important, I play walking football. Which is a growing sport which attracts a group of older men who otherwise perhaps wouldn't do a great deal of sport. This came to mind, and I thought I must come today because this Sunday afternoon I participated in my first ever walking football tournament at Redlands, and it was wonderful. It was great. Now, it keeps us fit. I'm sure it's very good for our mental health. I get in touch with my inner 13-year-old. There's a huge amount of social connection. I've made very many very good friends doing it. I know that, okay, leisure, as John Selgren said, is not a statutory function, and in a way you don't have to spend the money on it. But I am sure there is a massive connection between how far you involve people in these sort of things, keep them fit, keep them socially connected, and the extent to which they call on the adult social care system later in life. It may well be that spending a few pounds here and taking a bit of risk here will do quite a lot for our very threatened older adult social care budgets, and for kids as well, but I'm looking at it from my perspective. Thank you.
And may I wish you luck with your football tournament Monday. Would anybody else like to come in and speak at all? Okay, thank you. I will then. Just a couple of things. I just love the vision of creating more of a community park rather than just a sport-only area. I did just wonder what a trim trail is. I personally haven't heard of that, but I thought, well, let's find out. And I just really wanted to say this is just the best way of working. Council, the college, Active Dorset, everybody coming together to find a solution. But if anybody out there in Weymouth is listening to this, you're going to have to use it or you'll lose it, because this model is very finely balanced in terms of income and outgoings. And it wouldn't take an awful lot for this project to fall on its face. So it's just so important that people get behind this. And on the basis that it's an online booking system and a key holder policy, I wonder whether we can have some sort of scrutiny or review in perhaps a year to see how this is actually working through, because marketing of this is going to be absolutely key. And I didn't see anything within their budget on this. I'm sure they will have taken marketing into consideration. But yeah, that's all I have to. I just think it's great working, and I think well done, John and team, for pulling this together. It's been a long haul.
Thank you, Chair. So on the trim trail, that will be then specifically designed, but my understanding where I've done them previously, this is around actually a set area. So if you're doing your 400 metres or 600 metres, low impact, so you know exactly how far you are walking around to set yourself a target. But along that trail, there will be low impact aerobic activities to effectively undertake if you want to do. So little benches or whatever else, so you can do your press-ups or sit-ups or whatever, just to encourage a bit more further activity. So it's more about the right environment, but knowing you can set yourself your own goal around the trail to understand how many steps or how many miles or whatever you're trying to undertake. The marketing question is in there. We didn't get time to pull it back out, but Martin is very, very clear. There is a promotional activity going through the local social media groups and making sure actually they are advertising and using the key groups already committed to using the group to make sure they get the message out wider and hook up some of the activity. So it is a full active marketing campaign, active down, not just within the Redlands area, but obviously wider across Weymouth and the Dorset as well.
Thank you. I'm going to send Councillor Heatley on the trim trail as soon as it's there. He's got to report back to us and let us know how it goes. Well, if nobody else wants to speak, we've got 4 recommendations. Shall we take them all in block? Is everybody happy, or would anybody like to come in? No, we're going to move that on block, and thank you very much indeed. You're looking confused here.
Gone on. Just to add, Chairman, Councillor Bedo Miller has given her apologies. Well, really did want to be with you, and because she's been a key part of this piece of work with us. Isn't because she's doing the Sofa in the Street, which I think many members are aware of, so that's the only reason she isn't with us this morning. Just taking my number of the comments to be made about the nature of the leisure service and the way in which the council promotes health and wellbeing, I perhaps might pick up with you afterwards and with the portfolio holder, because this may be an area where it might be helpful to have a member webinar or similar, where we perhaps talk a little bit about some of the things that we do to promote health and well-being, very much along the lines that Councillor Heatley was describing, and very much about using those open public spaces that we as a council manage, that, as Councillor Heatley said, are such a key part of making sure our community stays safe. In that sense, Chairman, it might be something we could do jointly with Sam Crowe as the Director of Public Health, because our team in place and Sam's team in public health work very closely together to ensure that our offer is actually driving forward the promotion of the well-being of our community. So that might be perhaps a follow-up action that we might want to discuss, Chairman.
I think that will be a great idea, because we still have to look at our ongoing strategy in terms of our other leisure operating centres, and some of the private ones are going to be in desperate trouble with the rising electricity prices. Some of the figures I've been quoted lately have been absolutely horrendous. So, and will we be able to review this in terms of whether it goes through scrutiny, just to have a look and make sure that everybody is happy that the key holder service and the online booking is actually working and is bringing in what it needs to bring in.
Thank you for that, Chairman. I think that would be an eminently sensible suggestion, assuming this does go forward and is approved by Cabinet. And I think your request to scrutiny to take a look at it after a suitable period of embedding would be a prudent thing to do. For exactly the reasons that you have said, but also the point you made earlier about this does critically depend. Active Dorset are only going to be able to do this provided they get the level of patronage that they projected in the business plan. If usage doesn't reach that level, then sadly there may need to look again. So I think that would be somewhere that scrutiny, perhaps getting an early heads up on how things are going, could make sure that we achieve what we want to, which is to keep this facility moving forward in the longer term.
Thank you. Should that be put in as a recommendation at all, do you feel? Could we make that recommendation number 5 then?
Chairman, I think I'm just looking at Lindsay, but I think that's all we need to. If you move that from the chair and you're supporting that by your committee, then that becomes a resolution of this committee.
I'm going to move that further recommendation that we keep on top of this and this goes through scrutiny to make sure this model is working. If it works well, it could be rolled out elsewhere, and it would be very interesting to make sure that this has to work. Is anybody able to second that for me? Thank you, Councillor Apothecary. Right. Ooh, right, if we're all happy, we're all moved that, we're fine, we're done. Let's move on. Thank you very much. Right, item number 9 is our forward plan. We don't actually have an awful lot on it. If anybody has having a sleepless night and wants to go through the policy library at any time. Oh, Councillor Coombs, have you got something for us?
Not something new. However, I wanted to just make a request regarding one of the items on the forward plan for the next meeting. And that's the new HRC for the eastern area of Dorset. Can we please have a local member briefing before this comes to committee, please? Because the whole situation has been particularly contentious for my ward because of the cross-border issues with Hampshire. It's something my community are very twitchy about, so I need to be fully aware of everything before anything becomes public.
Thank you, John. Are you happy to take that forward? Thank you. Well, if there's nothing else on the forward plan, that's noted. Item 10 is urgent items. We have none. Exempt business, we don't have that. Do you know, we've done really well today. This meeting's only taken 47 minutes. I spent at least 10 times that reading through everything on Redlands and archaeological digs and goodness knows what. So thank you very much for coming. The meeting is now closed.